He invited her so everyone could watch her fail again. The words echoed in Emily Carter's mind as the elevator doors slid open to the soft glow of chandeliers dripping in gold light. The grand ballroom of the Westbridge Hotel unfolding before her like a stage she never agreed to step on. The air thick with expensive perfume and polished laughter that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. And for a moment, her heels paused against the marble floor as if her body remembered before she did. Remembered what it felt like to be small in rooms like this, too. Be measured, compared, quietly dismissed. But she stepped forward anyway, her black dress simple, almost understated against a sea of sequins and tailored suits. Because she hadn't come here to impress them. She had come because running would mean he still had power, and she refused to give him that anymore. Not tonight. Not after everything. A ripple moved through the crowd as familiar faces turned, whispers traveling faster than music. Emily Carter, someone murmured, isn't that Daniel Brooks? And just like that, 10 years collapsed into a single breath. She could almost taste the past, bitter and sharp, but she kept walking, spine straight, eyes calm, until she saw him. Daniel stood near the bar, exactly where he used to command attention, his presence still loud even in silence, a glass of whiskey in hand. A woman in a silver dress resting lightly on his arm like a carefully chosen accessory, younger, polished, smiling the kind of smile that didn't ask questions. And when his eyes found Emily, something flickered, not surprise. No, something closer to satisfaction, like a plan unfolding exactly the way he wanted. He pushed himself off the bar and approached, slow, deliberate, drawing attention without needing to raise his voice. Emily, he said, her name rolling off his tongue like a performance. And just like before, the room seemed to lean in, waiting, watching, measuring her reaction. I wasn't sure you'd actually show up, he added, his tone light, but edged with something sharper underneath, something meant to cut. And there it was, the first move. The invitation wasn't kindness, it was a trap, and he wanted an audience. His fiancée tilted her head slightly, eyes scanning Emily from head to toe. Not openly cruel, just enough to signal hierarchy. Daniel chuckled softly, loud enough for those closest to hear. Still in the city. Still, getting by. The pause deliberate, the implication heavier than the words themselves. A few quiet laughs followed, polite, uncomfortable, but present. The kind of laughter that always finds safety in numbers. And for a second, the old reflex stirred in her chest. That familiar tightening, that instinct to shrink, to explain, to defend. But she didn't. Her fingers simply adjusted the clutch in her hand, her breathing steady, her gaze level as it met his. And that was what unsettled him first. Not anger, not tears, but nothing. Because Emily Carter, the woman he used to know, would have reacted. She would have tried to prove something, to earn back space that was never hers to begin with. But this version of her stood there like she owed no one an explanation, and that silence, it shifted something, subtle, almost invisible, but real. Daniel's smile tightened just a fraction. His fiancée glanced at him, sensing it, the slightest crack in control, and somewhere across the room, a microphone clicked softly to life, unnoticed by most, but not by Emily, because she had been waiting for that sound, not as a rescue, but as a signal. And as the host's voice began to rise above the hum of conversation, calm and confident, the night Daniel thought he orchestrated started to move in a direction he could no longer predict. The microphone hum cut gently through the room, soft at first, almost polite, but it carried a weight that shifted the rhythm of the night. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, glasses paused halfway to lips, and Emily felt it before she fully heard it. The subtle recalibration of attention, the way a room senses importance before it understands it. Daniel followed the sound instinctively, his posture straightening as if expecting recognition, because men like him always assumed the spotlight would find them eventually. His fiancée leaned closer, whispering something light and dismissive, but her eyes flickered with curiosity. Scanning the stage, the host stepped forward, composed, confident, the kind of presence that did not need to raise its voice to command silence. And as the last of the chatter faded into a low hum, Emily remained still, her expression unchanged, but her pulse had slowed, not quickened, because unlike everyone else in that room, she was not wondering what would happen next. She already knew. Daniel glanced back at her, searching for something, any crack, any sign that she was unsettled, but she simply met his gaze without urgency, without defense, and that absence of reaction began to itch under his skin. He had built this moment carefully, invited the right people, curated the setting, ensured the narrative would unfold in his favor. Emily as the past, as the lesson, as the quiet cautionary tale that made his present look stronger, and yet something was slipping, something small but undeniable. His smirk returned, tighter now, more deliberate, as if forcing control back into place. "You picked an interesting night to show up," he said, his voice lower this time, meant only for her, though the nearby ears still caught it. "I hope you are not expecting anything more than nostalgia." The word lingered, laced with quiet dismissal. Emily tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in consideration, as if his words were something distant, something already losing relevance. "Nostalgia only matters when you are still living in it," she replied softly, her voice even, almost gentle. And that was new. Daniel felt it immediately, not the words themselves, but the tone. There was no pleading in it, no attempt to prove or persuade, just a simple statement that did not need his agreement. His fiancée shifted again, this time more noticeably, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she recovered. The dynamic had changed and she felt it, even if she could not name it, across the room. A few heads began to turn more fully toward the stage. The host adjusted the microphone slightly, and the screen behind him flickered to life with a subtle glow. The logo of a company Daniel knew all too well appeared, crisp, unmistakable, his company, or what he still believed was his. His attention snapped forward, confusion threading through his confidence. This was not part of the program he had approved. He knew every detail of tonight's agenda, every speaker, every segment, and this was not on it. The host began to speak, thanking sponsors, acknowledging partners, building towards something with careful precision. The words measured, intentional, and with each sentence, the room leaned further in. Emily exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes not from relief, but from certainty, because the night was no longer his to control. Daniel's grip tightened around his glass, the condensation damp against his fingers, as realization crept in, quiet and unwelcome, that whatever was about to happen, it was not something he had planned. And for the first time since she walked through those doors, he was no longer looking at Emily like she was part of his story. He was starting to wonder if he had walked into hers. The room seemed to inhale all at once as the host's voice settled into a deliberate calm, the kind that signaled something far more important than polite announcements. And Daniel felt it in the way conversations stopped completely now. No lingering whispers, no clinking glasses, just attention, focused and absolute. The screen behind the stage sharpened, the company logo expanding into a full presentation, numbers, projections, acquisitions, and Daniel's chest tightened almost imperceptibly because he recognized every detail, every slide, every figure, except one thing, the ownership line at the bottom that had changed without his knowledge. The host smiled faintly, glancing across the room as if measuring the moment before releasing it. "Tonight we are honored to introduce the principal investor behind this transformation, a name that has remained intentionally private until now. Someone whose strategic acquisition has redefined the future of this company." The words landed carefully, each one pulling the tension tighter. Daniel's grip on his glass stilled completely, his mind moving faster than the room, trying to calculate, to understand, to regain control, because there was no way, no possible way this could be happening without him knowing. His fiancée leaned in again, whispering a question he did not answer, because for the first time, he did not have one. The host turned slightly, extending a hand toward the crowd, and then he said it. Emily Carter. The name did not echo. It did not need to. It dropped into the silence like something inevitable, something that had already taken its place long before anyone realized. And the shift was immediate, visible, undeniable. Heads turned not toward the stage, but toward her. The same people who had looked at her with quiet dismissal moments ago now searching her face with something entirely different, something closer to recognition. Daniel did not move at first, as if still waiting for the correction, for the clarification that would restore the version of reality he understood. but it did not come. Emily stepped forward with the same calm she had carried all night. Not hurried, not hesitant, just certain, the light catching the simplicity of her dress. In a way that made it feel intentional now, not modest but controlled, defined. The space parted for her without being asked, people shifting instinctively as she passed. And then a man stepped forward from near the stage, his presence quiet but unmistakable, tailored suit, composed posture, the kind of authority that did not need introduction. He met Emily halfway, offering not dominance, not rescue, but alignment, his hand resting briefly at her back as they turned together toward the room. Partners, equals, Daniel's breath caught somewhere between disbelief and realization, because he recognized the man now, not from social circles, but from headlines, from deals that reshaped markets, from a level of power Daniel had always believed he was approaching but had never reached, and suddenly the pieces aligned in a way that left no room for denial. The acquisition, the silence, the shift, it had all been her, not through him, not because of him, but entirely separate from him, entirely beyond him. Emily took the microphone when it was offered, her fingers steady, her voice clear, not louder than necessary, just enough to carry. "Thank you," she said, simple, composed, as if this moment was not a surprise, but a continuation, as if she had always been walking toward it. "I believe in building things that last," she continued, her gaze moving briefly across the room before settling nowhere in particular. And in that absence, Daniel realized something that settled heavier than anything she could have said directly. She was not speaking to him. She did not need to, because whatever he had tried to take from her years ago, whatever space he thought he had removed her from, she had rebuilt it somewhere he could not reach, and now he was standing in it as a spectator. The room began to respond, applause rising, voices shifting, energy recalibrating around her presence, and Daniel stood there, no longer the center, no longer the architect of the night, just a man watching a reality he did not control unfold without him. And as Emily handed the microphone back and turned slightly, her eyes passed over him for the briefest second, not cold, not warm, just distant, like looking through something that no longer held meaning. And in that moment, Daniel understood the one thing he had never planned for. She had not come back to prove anything. She had come back because she no longer needed to. The applause did not fade quickly. It lingered, reshaping the room in a way Emily could feel without turning around. The same voices that once whispered about her now rising in approval, curiosity, even admiration. But she did not slow her steps as she moved away from the stage, her heels steady against the marble, her posture unchanged, because none of it, not the applause, not the sudden attention, not even the recognition, was what she had come for. The man beside her spoke quietly, something about the next meeting, the next phase, but his tone carried respect, not direction, and she nodded once, already knowing, already ahead, because this had never been a moment she stumbled into. It was one she built in silence, piece by piece, far from rooms like this, far from people like him. Daniel remained where he was, the noise around him returning in fragments, conversations restarting with a different energy, but none of it reached him the same way. His world had narrowed to a single realization that refused to settle. His fiancée was speaking now, her voice softer, uncertain in a way he had never heard before, asking questions he could not answer, because every answer he had relied on no longer fit. Every assumption had shifted beneath him without warning. He glanced toward the stage again, as if expecting something to reverse, something to correct the narrative back into place. But the screen had already changed, the presentation moving forward, business continuing. The moment no longer waiting for him to understand it. And that was the part that settled deepest. The world had moved on without pausing for his reaction. Across the room, a few familiar faces approached Emily cautiously, their smiles warmer now, their tones adjusted, as if rewriting their memory of her in real time. But she greeted them with the same calm distance, polite, composed, never lingering, never offering more than what was necessary, because she recognized something they did not. Their reactions were not about her. They were about what she now represented, and she had learned long ago not to build anything on that kind of foundation. Daniel finally moved, one step, then another, drawn forward not by confidence, but by something unresolved, something he could not leave unanswered. He stopped a few feet from her, that same distance from earlier, but everything about it had changed. The space between them no longer familiar, no longer controlled. "Emily," he said again, but this time her name did not carry ownership. It carried hesitation, and for a moment, it almost sounded like a question. She turned slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge his presence without offering him the center he once held. "I did not know," he continued, the words uneven, stripped of the polish he usually relied on, and she studied him briefly, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, just with clarity, because she had already lived through the version of him that needed to understand, and she no longer required it. "There are a lot of things you did not know," she replied quietly, her voice steady, not sharp, not cold, just factual, and that was what made it land. There was no edge left in her tone, no need to wound, because the truth itself was enough. He exhaled, something unspoken catching in his chest, searching for a way back into a conversation that no longer belonged to him. But there was nothing there, no opening, no invitation, only the quiet boundary she held without effort. The man beside her glanced toward Daniel briefly, not dismissive, not threatened, simply aware, and then his attention returned to Emily, waiting, not leading, and that subtle shift, that quiet alignment, said more than any introduction ever could. Daniel nodded once, almost to himself, as if acknowledging something he could not change, and when Emily turned away again, fully this time, continuing forward without looking back, it was not dramatic, it was not deliberate, it was simply natural, like closing a door that had already been left behind. And as the room carried on around him, louder now, brighter, Daniel stood in the space where he had once been certain of everything, realizing too late that the version of her he tried to hold on to no longer existed, and the woman who stood in front of him now had never needed him to become who she was. The music resumed, softer at first, as if the room itself was recalibrating to a new center of gravity, and Emily felt it not as noise but as distance, the kind that separates who she used to be from where she now stood. She moved toward the edge of the ballroom, where the tall windows overlooked the city lights stretching for miles, each one steady, unmoved, indifferent to the shifting emotions inside the room. And for a brief moment, she allowed herself to pause, not out of exhaustion, but out of recognition. This was the first time she had stood in a space tied to her past without feeling the need to brace herself. The weight she used to carry here had dissolved somewhere along the path she built alone. Behind her, the conversations continued, louder now, her name passing through different tones, curiosity, admiration, speculation, but none of it reached her the same way anymore, because she had learned the difference between being seen and being understood, and tonight was not about either. It was about closure that did not require words. The man beside her stepped away briefly to take a call, leaving her alone for the first time since the announcement. But she did not feel exposed. She felt complete, as if the silence around her belonged to her now, not to them. A reflection in the glass caught her attention, not sharp, just enough to show her outline against the city beyond, and for a second, she saw both versions of herself layered together. The woman who once stood in rooms like this trying to earn her place, and the woman who now walked through them knowing she did not need to ask for it. The difference was not in the dress, not in the title, but in the absence of doubt. Footsteps approached behind her, slower this time, without the confidence Daniel used to carry, and she did not turn immediately. She did not need to. His presence no longer had the power to pull her attention without permission. "I used to think I understood you," he said quietly, the words careful, almost measured, as if he was choosing them for the first time instead of relying on what had always worked before. Emily turned then, fully this time, her expression calm, open, but distant in a way that made it clear this was not a continuation. It was a closing. "You understood the version of me that fit your world," she replied, her voice steady, and for a moment, he nodded, because that was something he could not argue with. "Not anymore. I thought I was helping you," he added, the statement fragile, stripped of its old certainty, and Emily let the words settle before responding, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for the truth he was only beginning to see. "You were helping yourself feel bigger," she said, not harsh, not accusing, just clear, and that clarity landed deeper than anything else could have, because there was no emotion left to deflect, No conflict left to engage with. Only reality. Daniel exhaled slowly. The weight of the room pressing in on him differently now, not as a stage, but as a place where he no longer held influence. And for the first time, he did not try to reclaim it. He simply stood there, facing what remained after everything he thought defined him had shifted. I did not think you would ever leave that version behind, he admitted, and Emily's gaze softened just slightly, not with warmth, but with understanding, because she remembered that version too. She had lived inside it longer than he ever had. Neither did I, she said, and that was the closest thing to honesty they had shared in years. The man in the tailored suit returned then, his presence quiet but grounding, and Emily turned toward him without hesitation, the transition seamless, natural, as if there had never been a question of where she belonged. Daniel stepped back instinctively, not pushed, not dismissed, just no longer part of the space she occupied. And as Emily moved forward again, leaving the window, the reflection, and the conversation behind, the room continued to shift around her. But she did not look back, because everything she had needed to face was already behind her. And for the first time, the silence she carried was not something she endured, it was something she owned. The night did not slow down for anyone, not even for the quiet transformations that had already taken place. And as Emily moved back into the flow of the ballroom, she no longer felt like someone passing through a memory. She felt like someone who had outgrown it entirely. The music had picked up again, a soft jazz rhythm filling the air as conversations layered over one another. But now when people approached her, there was a different kind of pause in their steps, a recalibration, as if they were adjusting not just to who she was, but to how they should be seen by her. And Emily noticed it without reacting, because she had learned that power was often revealed in what you did not acknowledge. A man introduced himself as a partner from another firm, his tone respectful, measured, asking thoughtful questions about her strategy, her vision, and she answered with clarity, not to impress, but because she no longer filtered her voice to fit someone else's expectations, each word steady, precise, the conversation moving forward without hesitation. Across the room, Daniel remained where he was for a long moment, watching something he could not quite define. It was not just her success, not just the title or the attention. It was the way she existed within it, untouched by the need for validation he had always assumed drove her. And that realization unsettled him more than anything else, because it meant he had never truly seen her, not even when he thought he knew her best. His fiancée stood beside him, quieter now, her confidence dimmed by something she could not fully articulate. And when she spoke again, it was not to question Emily, but to question him, her voice low, uncertain, asking how he had missed something this significant, how someone like Emily had built something so large without it ever crossing his awareness. And Daniel did not answer, because the truth was not simple. It was layered in years of assumptions, of dismissals, of moments where he had chosen not to look deeper because it was easier to believe the version of her that kept him at the center. Emily stepped away from the conversation as it naturally concluded, her attention shifting. Without effort, her presence no longer anchored to any single interaction, and for a brief moment, she found herself near the entrance again, where the night had begun. The same doors now opened to the quiet hallway beyond, and she paused there, not because she needed to leave, but because she recognized the symmetry, the beginning and the end existing in the same space, but with entirely different meaning. Her reflection caught once more in the polished surface of the doors, clearer now, no longer layered with hesitation, just her, as she was, complete without explanation. Footsteps approached again, but this time she did not need to turn to know who it was. Daniel stopped beside her, not too close, not too far, as if he had finally learned the distance she required. I used to think success meant being seen by rooms like this, he said, his voice quieter than it had ever been, and Emily glanced toward him briefly, her expression neutral. Waiting, he exhaled, a small, almost self-aware smile touching his lips. I think I was wrong, he added, and there was no defense in it, no attempt to reclaim ground, just acknowledgement. And Emily nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition, because that realization was his to carry, not hers to validate. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was clean, free of expectation, and for the first time, There was nothing left between them that needed to be resolved. Daniel stepped back slightly, giving space not out of habit, but out of understanding, and Emily turned toward the doors, her hand resting lightly against the handle, the cool metal steady beneath her fingers. She could stay, continue the conversations, build further connections. But she did not need to, because what mattered had already happened, not the announcement, not the recognition, but the quiet moment where she stood in front of her past and felt nothing pull her backward. She opened the door slowly, the sound soft against the music behind her, and as she stepped into the hallway, the noise of the ballroom dimmed, replaced by a calm that felt entirely her own, and behind her, the night continued. But it no longer defined her place within it. The hallway was quieter than she remembered, or maybe it was simply that she could finally hear herself think inside it. The soft hum of distant music fading behind the closed doors as Emily walked forward at an unhurried pace, her heels echoing lightly against the polished floor, each step steady, deliberate, not because she was trying to leave something behind, but because she no longer needed to stay. The air here felt different, cooler, untouched by the weight of expectation that filled the ballroom, and, for the first time that night, she allowed her shoulders to relax just slightly, not from exhaustion, but from release, the kind that comes when something long carried is finally set down without ceremony, without anyone else needing to witness it. She passed a series of framed photographs along the wall, images from past events, smiling faces frozen in moments that once might have mattered to her, but now felt distant, like artifacts from a life she had outgrown. And yet, there was no bitterness in that realization, only clarity, because she understood now that growth did not erase the past. It simply redefined its place. A soft voice called her name from behind, not urgent, not demanding, and she turned just enough to see the man from earlier approaching again, his pace measured, his expression composed but warmer now, as if the space outside the ballroom allowed for something more genuine to surface. "You left before they could circle you," he said lightly, stopping a respectful distance away, and Emily allowed a faint smile to touch her lips, not for him, but for the accuracy of the observation. They already had what they needed. She replied, her voice calm, and he nodded, understanding. More than most would, because he had seen rooms like that change before, seen how quickly perception could shift once power was revealed, and how little of it was ever truly about the person at the center. "There is a car waiting whenever you are ready," he added, not as instruction, but as an option, and Emily glanced briefly toward the end of the hallway where the exit doors stood, glass reflecting the city lights beyond. She did not answer immediately, not because she was unsure, but because she was allowing the moment to settle fully, to exist without rushing past it. Behind her, the ballroom doors opened briefly, a burst of laughter spilling into the hallway before fading again, and with it came a glimpse of the world she had just stepped out of, still moving, still alive, still chasing the same rhythms it always had, but now clearly separate from her own. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked after a moment, his tone neutral, curious but not intrusive, and Emily considered the question, not as a test, but as something worth answering honestly. "I used to think I would," she said slowly, her gaze steady on the reflection ahead, "but what I really missed was who I thought I had to be to belong there," she added, and the distinction settled between them with quiet weight, because it was not about the room, or the people, or even the life she once had. It was about the version of herself she had finally released. He nodded once, not offering a response, because none was needed. The truth in her words stood on its own, and after a brief pause, he stepped slightly aside, giving her a clear path forward. Emily took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just enough to mark the transition. And then she walked toward the doors, her reflection moving with her, no longer divided, no longer uncertain, just whole. As her hand reached for the handle, the cool surface grounding, familiar, she paused for the briefest second, not to look back, but to acknowledge the space she was leaving behind, and then she pushed the door open, the night air meeting her with a quiet clarity that felt like a beginning rather than an ending. And as she stepped outside, the city stretched before her, vast, uncontained, and entirely her own. The night air carried a quiet kind of honesty that the ballroom never could, cool against her skin, steady, real, and Emily stepped onto the wide stone steps outside the hotel, as if crossing into a space where nothing needed to be performed. The city stretched out before her in layers of light and motion, taxis gliding past, distant sirens fading into the rhythm of traffic, everything moving forward without hesitation, without memory, and for a moment, she simply stood there, not lost in thought, but present in a way she had not allowed herself to be in years. Her hand brushed lightly against the fabric of her dress, grounding, familiar, no longer chosen to please anyone else, but simply because it felt like her. A black car idled near the curb, understated but precise, the driver already stepping forward as he noticed her, but she did not move toward it yet, not immediately, because there was something in the stillness she wanted to hold on to. Just a little longer. Behind her, the heavy doors opened again, the sound softer this time, and footsteps followed, slower, more measured than before. She did not turn right away. She did not need to. There was no urgency left in anything connected to him. Emily, Daniel's voice reached her, not sharp, not commanding, just present, and when she finally turned, it was not with resistance, but with the calm certainty of someone who no longer feared what the past might say. He stood a few steps away, no longer framed by the crowd, no longer supported by the structure that once defined him, just a man under the same open sky. His expression different now, not broken, not dramatic, but quieter, as if something inside him had shifted into a place he did not fully understand yet. I almost did not come out here, he admitted, his voice carrying a trace of something unfamiliar, hesitation, and Emily watched him for a moment, not searching, not judging, simply observing. You did, she replied, her tone even, and that was enough to let him continue. I thought I would still have something to say, he added, a faint, self-aware smile touching his lips, but I do not think I do anymore. The admission settled between them without tension, without expectation, because there was nothing left to resolve. Emily nodded slightly, her gaze steady. Sometimes silence says more than anything else ever could, she said, and Daniel let out a small breath. Not heavy, not burdened, just real. I used to think I was the reason you became who you are, he continued, the words coming more carefully now, but I can see now that I was just in the way of it. Emily's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened, not toward him, but toward the truth itself, because she understood what it took to say something like that without hiding behind anything else. We were both in the way of who we needed to become, she said quietly, and that was as close to balance as their past would ever find. The city moved around them, headlights passing, footsteps echoing faintly on the sidewalk, life continuing without pause. And Daniel glanced toward the waiting car, then back at her. You are not coming back inside, he asked, not as a challenge, but as a genuine question. Emily followed his gaze briefly. The doors now closed again, the music faint behind them, and then she shook her head once. There is nothing in there I need anymore, she answered, and there was no regret in it, no second thought, just clarity. Daniel nodded slowly, as if accepting something he could not change, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence settling comfortably between two people who no longer needed to fill it. Finally, he stepped back, not out of defeat, but out of understanding, and Emily turned toward the car, her steps smooth, unhurried, the driver opening the door without a word. She paused just before getting in, not to look back, but to take one last breath of the night as it was, unfiltered, unclaimed, and then she stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her, the car pulling away from the curb with quiet precision. And as the hotel faded into the distance behind tinted glass, Emily did not watch it disappear, because for the first time, there was nothing back there calling her name anymore. The city lights blurred softly against the tinted window as the car moved through the night, each passing street lamp casting brief shadows across Emily's face. But her expression remained unchanged, calm, grounded, untouched by the movement around her. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, fingers relaxed, no longer carrying the tension that once lived in moments like this. The quiet hum of the engine filled the space, steady and controlled, and for the first time in a long time, silence did not feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something she could finally exist. Within, the driver navigated through traffic with practiced ease, the rhythm of the road consistent, predictable, nothing like the emotional unpredictability she had once built her life around. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass, softer now, not layered with doubt or expectation. Just her, present, complete, and she studied it for a moment, not out of vanity, but recognition. Because this version of herself had not appeared overnight. It had been built slowly, through decisions no one had seen, through moments that had never been witnessed or applauded, the kind of growth that does not announce itself until it no longer needs to. Her phone lit briefly on the seat beside her, a series of messages appearing one after another, names from the past, from tonight, from people who suddenly remembered her, their words filled with surprise, admiration, curiosity, some even with apology disguised as reconnection. And she glanced at the screen only once before turning it face down. Again, not out of avoidance, but because none of it held urgency anymore. Validation that arrives after the fact does not carry the same weight. She had learned that long ago. The car slowed as it approached an intersection, the red light casting a soft glow inside and outside. A couple crossed the street, laughing quietly, unaware of anything beyond their moment. And Emily watched them briefly, not with longing, but with understanding, because she knew now that peace was not found in who stood beside you, but in who you were when no one else was there. The light turned green, the car continued, and her thoughts shifted, not backward, but forward, toward the work that awaited her, the decisions she would make next, the life she was actively shaping. Because tonight had not been an ending. It had been a confirmation, a quiet acknowledgement that she had already moved beyond what once defined her. The city skyline appeared ahead, rising strong and steady, each building a testament to time, effort, persistence, and she felt a subtle alignment with it, not because of status, but because of process, because she understood what it meant to build something that could stand on its own, without needing approval. The car turned onto a quieter street, the noise of the city fading slightly, replaced by a more contained stillness, and as it pulled up in front of her building, the driver stepped out smoothly, opening the door with quiet efficiency. Emily stepped out onto the sidewalk, the night air wrapping around her once more, familiar now, grounding. She glanced up briefly at the building, its windows lit in scattered patterns, each one holding a different story, a different life moving forward in its own way. And she walked toward the entrance without hesitation, her steps light but certain, the door opening with a soft click as she entered, the lobby quiet, warm, a contrast to the spectacle she had left behind. And as the elevator doors closed in front of her reflection, there was no question left in her eyes, no uncertainty waiting to be resolved. Only the quiet understanding that the life she had rebuilt was not something she needed to show anyone, because it was already enough. Exactly as it was, the elevator rose in silence, smooth and uninterrupted, the soft hum barely noticeable beneath the quiet rhythm of Emily's breathing. And as the numbers lit up one by one above the door, she did not watch them with anticipation, she watched them with awareness. Each floor a simple marker of movement, not progress she needed to measure, not distance she needed to justify, just motion forward, steady and unforced. The mirrored walls reflected her from every angle, not multiplying her, but confirming her. The same calm expression, the same grounded presence. No hesitation lingering beneath the surface. No second version waiting to be revealed. Just one, whole and certain. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a private hallway washed in warm light. Quiet, untouched by anything outside its walls. And she stepped forward without pause. Her heels softer now against the carpet, the sound absorbed, contained, like the thoughts she no longer needed to carry. Her door stood at the end of the hall, familiar, unchanged, and yet everything about how she approached it felt different, not because the space had transformed, but because she had. Her hand reached for the handle, fingers steady, and as the door opened, the subtle scent of her home greeted her, clean linen, a trace of cedar, something distinctly hers. The lights responded as she stepped inside, illuminating a space that reflected not status, not spectacle, but intention, every detail chosen without compromise, without explanation. The kind of place that did not need to impress anyone because it was never built for that purpose. She set her clutch down on the console near the entrance, the small movement deliberate, a quiet signal that the outside world had been left exactly where it belonged, outside. Her heels followed, placed neatly beside the door, the absence of their sound immediately changing the atmosphere, grounding it further, deeper into stillness. She moved through the living room slowly, her fingertips brushing lightly against the edge of a table, the back of a chair, not out of distraction, but connection. Each object carrying a memory not of who she used to be, but of how she had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, decision by decision. The city stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, vast and alive. But from here, it felt distant, not unreachable, but no longer overwhelming. She stood there for a moment, looking out, not searching, not comparing, simply observing, the way she had learned to do with everything else in her life, without attachment, without judgment. Her phone lit again on the counter behind her, the glow subtle but persistent, and this time she turned toward it, not because she felt pulled, but because she chose to acknowledge it. She picked it up, scrolling briefly, the same messages, the same sudden interest, the same attempts to reconnect, but one message stood apart. Not longer, not louder, just clearer, from the man who had stood beside her that night, confirming tomorrow's meeting. No embellishment, no assumptions, just forward motion. She typed a short response, precise, intentional, and set the phone down again. The interaction complete, her reflection appeared faintly in the glass of the window, layered against the city lights. But this time there was no overlap with the past, no shadow of who she had been trying to resolve itself into who she was now. Only alignment. She walked toward the bedroom, the space quiet, untouched, waiting without expectation, and as she moved through it, there was no sense of arrival, no dramatic realization, just a steady understanding that this life, this version of herself, was not something she had stepped into. It was something she had created, entirely on her own terms. And as she paused by the window one last time before the night settled fully around her, there was no need to look back, because nothing behind her held the weight it once did, and nothing ahead of her required permission to exist. Morning arrived without urgency, the light easing into the room through the floor-to-ceiling windows in a slow, deliberate way, casting soft patterns across the polished surfaces that reflected a life built with intention rather than display. And Emily woke not to an alarm, not to obligation, but to awareness, her eyes opening gradually, as if her body had already decided it was ready to move forward. The quiet of her apartment held a different kind of energy now, not emptiness, not silence to be filled, but space that belonged entirely to her. She sat up slowly, the sheets shifting lightly around her, and for a brief moment, she remained still, not gathering strength, but recognizing it, because the version of herself that once needed time to prepare for the day no longer existed. There was nothing she needed to brace against, nothing waiting to pull her back into a version of life she had already left behind. Her feet touched the floor, grounding, steady, and she stood, moving toward the window where the city stretched beneath a pale morning sky. Softer now, less defined than it had been the night before, but just as alive, just as constant. She watched it for a moment, not searching for anything, not measuring herself against it, simply observing, because she had learned that clarity often came in stillness, not in motion. Her phone rested on the nightstand, quiet for now, the messages from the night before no longer demanding attention, and when she picked it up, it was not out of habit, but choice. The screen lit with updates, responses, invitations already forming in the aftermath of what had happened, names reaching out, opportunities presenting themselves, the world adjusting to who she had revealed herself to be. But she did not rush to answer. She did not feel pulled by any of it, because she understood something they did not. She had not changed overnight. They had simply caught up to a version of her that had existed long before they noticed. She set the phone down again, the decision effortless, and moved through her morning with the same quiet precision that now defined her life. The kitchen greeted her with soft light, the scent of fresh coffee beginning to fill the space as she prepared it, not rushed, not distracted, each movement intentional, measured, as if even the smallest actions held value when they were done without compromise. The warmth of the cup settled into her hands as she leaned lightly against the counter, taking a slow sip. The taste familiar, grounding, and for a moment, she allowed herself to reflect, not on what had happened the night before, but on what it meant moving forward, because that was where her attention belonged now, not in revisiting what had already been resolved, but in continuing to build what she had already begun. The quiet buzz of her phone broke the stillness again. This time a call, and when she glanced at the screen, the name was expected, the man who had stood beside her, not as a savior, not as a shadow, but as an equal, and she answered without hesitation, her voice clear, composed, already aligned with the day ahead. Their conversation moved quickly, not rushed, but efficient, discussing plans, decisions, next steps that extended far beyond the single moment that had shifted everything publicly, because for them, that moment was not the peak. It was simply a point along a much larger path. She ended the call with a brief acknowledgement, no excess, no need for reassurance, because everything that needed to be understood already was. And as she set the cup down and moved toward the door, preparing to step into the day, there was no sense of performance in her actions. No need to prove anything to anyone. The world would continue to adjust around her, to reinterpret her, to respond in ways she could not control. But none of that defined her direction anymore, because she had already chosen it. And as she reached for the handle, stepping out into the quiet hallway once more, there was only one thing left that mattered. Not where she had been, not who had doubted her, but where she was going next. And the quiet certainty that she would get there on her own terms. The hallway outside her apartment felt different in the morning. Quieter in a way that was not empty, but settled, as if everything around her had already accepted its place without needing to prove it. And Emily walked through it with the same steady pace, her steps measured but unforced, the soft carpet absorbing any sound that might have once echoed with uncertainty. The elevator doors opened almost immediately, as if anticipating her arrival, and when she stepped inside, the mirrored walls reflected a version of her that no longer searched for confirmation. It was smooth, uninterrupted, and as the numbers lowered one by one, she did not track them, because she was no longer someone waiting to arrive somewhere. She was already there. The doors opened into the lobby, warm lights spilling across polished floors, a few quiet conversations lingering in the corners, and the front desk attendant greeted her with a subtle nod, respectful, familiar, not because of who she had been introduced as the night before, but because of how she carried herself now. Consistent, grounded, unchanged by attention, she stepped outside and the city met her again, this time in daylight, clearer, sharper, every detail visible without the soft disguise of night. People moved quickly along the sidewalk, coffee cups in hand, voices overlapping in fragments of conversation, life continuing in its usual rhythm, and Emily stepped into it without hesitation, not adjusting to it, not trying to match it, simply moving within it as it was, the car waiting at the curb door, already open, the driver greeting her with quiet efficiency, and as she settled into the seat, the door closed with a soft finality that marked not an ending, but a transition. The car pulled into traffic seamlessly, blending into the flow without drawing attention, and Emily turned her gaze toward the window, watching the city pass not as something she needed to conquer, but as something she was already part of. Her phone vibrated once, then again, messages continuing to arrive, updates, invitations, confirmations, the aftermath of a moment that others were still trying to process, but she did not reach for it immediately. She let it sit, because urgency no longer defined her response to anything. When she finally picked it up, her movements were deliberate, controlled, scanning briefly before responding only to what mattered, her replies concise, clear, no excess, no performance. Because she understood that power was not in how much you said, but in what you chose not to. The car slowed as it approached a large glass building rising above the street, its structure clean, modern, reflective, the kind of place built not to impress, but to endure. And as the vehicle came to a stop, the driver stepped out. Opening her door, Emily stepped onto the pavement with the same calm certainty she had carried from the moment she left her apartment. The entrance doors opened automatically as she approached, recognizing movement without needing permission, and inside, the atmosphere shifted, quieter, more focused, the hum of work replacing the noise of social performance. People moved with purpose here, their attention directed, their energy contained, and as Emily walked through the lobby, a few heads turned, Not with curiosity, not with surprise, but with recognition, the kind that comes from understanding someone's role rather than questioning their presence. She did not pause. She did not acknowledge it beyond what was necessary, because she was not here to be seen. She was here to continue. The elevator at the far end opened as if timed perfectly, and she stepped inside, the doors closing softly behind her, sealing her into a space where the next phase of her life was already waiting. And as the numbers began to rise again, there was no sense of anticipation, only certainty, because everything that once needed to be proven had already been left behind, and everything ahead of her was something she would define on her own terms. The elevator slowed to a gentle stop, the soft chime marking her arrival not as a destination, but as a continuation. And when the doors opened, the floor before her stretched wide and composed, a space defined by quiet precision. Rather than spectacle, glass walls framed the city beyond in clean lines, the morning light sharper now, illuminating everything without distortion, and Emily stepped forward without hesitation, her presence aligning naturally with the rhythm of the place. No adjustment needed, no transition required, because she did not step into roles anymore. She carried her own. A few voices greeted her as she passed, not loudly, not performative, just acknowledgement, the kind that came from understanding, rather than curiosity. And she returned it with the same measured calm, never lingering, never seeking more. Her office stood at the far end, doors slightly open, the space within already alive with quiet activity. Documents arranged, screens lit, everything prepared not for her arrival, but for the work itself. She entered without pause, setting her bag down with a small, deliberate motion, the kind that signaled not the start of something, but the continuation of something already in motion. The man from the night before stood near the window, reviewing a set of figures, and when he turned, there was no surprise in his expression, only readiness, a subtle nod passing between them that required no words, because everything that needed to be understood already was. The conversation that followed was precise, efficient, each point addressed with clarity, decisions made without hesitation, because neither of them approached the moment as something fragile or uncertain. It was simply another step in a structure they were building together. And as the discussion moved forward, Emily felt no need to prove her place within it. She did not measure her words against expectation. She did not second-guess her perspective, because the space she occupied had already been earned long before anyone else recognized it. The city beyond the glass moved steadily, cars threading through streets, people crossing intersections, life unfolding without pause. And inside, the same continuity held, work progressing, ideas forming, nothing dramatic, nothing overstated, just movement that mattered. At one point, she stepped closer to the window, her reflection faint against the skyline. And for a brief second, the past surfaced, not as something heavy, not as something unresolved, but as a distant outline, a version of herself that no longer defined her direction. She did not push it away. She did not hold on to it. She simply acknowledged it and let it remain where it belonged. Behind her, the man spoke again, outlining the next phase, the scale of what they were about to execute. And she listened, not as someone catching up, but as someone already aligned. Her response immediate, clear, decisive, because she understood something that could not be taught, only lived, that true control did not